So, hello everyone. My name is Dr. Eniola Ajanaku. I'm the founder of Lighthouse. Thank you for everyone joining us today and spending your evening with us. I hope you have an informative session. I thank Dr. Sandra Quezada. I see her. She's already logged in. Thank her for joining. And I see her video. Thank you so much. And I welcome all of you to this event. I see Angelique, I think that's one of the students, is also going to be talking to us. Thank you for coming in. So as I said, my name is Dr. Eniola Ajanaku. I'm going to kind of tell you a little bit about my background. I'm an internal medicine hospitalist. I trained in Howard University in DC for medical school, and then I went to Inova Fairfax residency in Virginia. So I've been in the DC area for some time. I've been in the East Coast for some time. I've been practicing about 3 years. I was initially in Frederick Memorial Hospital, and then now I'm in Tacoma Park Acute Rehab, where I function and serve as the medical director. So a few things. I want to talk about Lighthouse. So Lighthouse is a faith-based Christian organization, and it was founded in about 2018. And it actually came from what I saw as a lack of mentorship for a lot of medical students, and also for younger students that were pre-med. I had a very difficult time going through medical school. I was a child of a single mother, and I thought that I couldn't do it, but I had to believe in myself and believe in my dream. And then through all that, I was able to kind of understand that I had it in me to do it. And also during that time, I got into more and deeper in my relationship with God. It wasn't religion to me, it was relationship, because it was such a tough time. And then I made a vow to myself that if I could help anybody coming behind me, I would make sure I would, pass the baton and kind of help them financially, spiritually, emotionally, anything you needed, I would be available, because it's not easy to be on this journey alone. And so that's why I'm very passionate about mentorship. So we do career mentorship, and then we also do life mentorship. So I'm going to talk about a little about the things that we offer. We offer scholarships. We're going to be doing 2 scholarships for the 2022 to 2023 academic year, which will open up in about a month or so. And then there's a $5,000 pre-med scholarship for a rising sophomore or a rising junior who has declared their pre-med. And then we will send you, since we all have everybody's email, we'll send you our information in terms of how to apply for the scholarship and in terms of the deadline for the scholarship. I'll also put on the chat lighthousescholar.com so you can get the recommendations. There's also the $10,000 scholarship. That's for a freshman medical student. That's a freshman starting in 2022 to 2023. The deadline to apply would be next year. As I said, I'll also put in the requirements for that. And then we have the Lighthouse Scholars Program, which is more of the mentorship program. That is where we match a pre-med with a medical student or an attending physician that will help you kind of navigate applying for medical school, navigate MCAT, navigate your college career, making sure that you make the right choices, and making sure there's somebody at least talking to you and then cheering you on. That is one aspect of that. That is more career mentorship. It's open to both men and women. And then we have mentorship monthly meetings, which I plan that we can meet every other Saturday to kind of encourage each other, pray with each other, and teach each other. So I try to teach on topics that will be relevant to us as students and young professionals. And I think everybody should learn from that. Lighthouse sometimes appears to be a woman or a more female thing, but we are pro-women, not anti-men. Men can also join us. In terms of career mentorship, I want to reach out to both men and women. So guys, you can also join us for that. And then our life mentorship really is something that I tag Be That Girl, and it's walking into your womanhood as the woman that God has created you to be, being aware of your power, being aware of your vulnerability, being aware of your strength. We have a 1-week program that's a Believers Foundational Mentorship class. I would recommend, if you want to take it during the summer, because it's intense. It's 1 week where, if anybody is kind of exploring a relationship with God or really wants to know God outside of religion, outside of what we hear from the world, but really enter a relationship with God, then we have that 1 week mentorship foundational class. I think it's not too long, just 1 week. And then that will really help you grow in yourself, because I find out that it's not just your career, but you're also your whole self as a human being that I'm interested in and God is interested in. And I may not get this chance again, but I just want to implore everybody I'm talking to open up your heart and to learn about relationship, because honestly, it's a relationship to me. I have tantrums with God. I'm not happy about him over certain things. I cry over certain things, but I've learned to trust him. And being the daughter of a single mother from Africa, my sister is also a doctor. She's a GI doctor. It really took his grace to be able to get to where I am. So that's why I'm so passionate about this. That's why I'm passionate about helping you guys. And before I talk too much, let me get Dr. Quezada to come talk to us. I'm going to put everything in the chat. So if you miss anything I said, I'll put it in the chat and then email it to you guys. So she's the Associate Dean of University of Maryland, and she has 2 students joining us today, Angelique Ely, and I think I see you guys. Thank you so much. And then Kaylee Kochoa. I think I missed it.
Kayla Quichua. You were close.
I'm so sorry, because I know people mispronounce my name every time, but I'm so sorry about that. So I'm just going to read her bio. Dr. Quezada is a practicing GI doctor and an associate dean for medical student admissions, as well as assistant dean for faculty diversity and inclusion at the School of Medicine. She earned her MD degree at University of Maryland School of Medicine, a master's in human nutrition at Columbia University, and master's in clinical research at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, Department of Health and Epidemiology. On a national level, she serves as a co-chair of the American Gastroenterological Association Equity Project and the American Association of Medical Colleges Committee on Student Diversity Affairs and Intersectionality Women of Color workshop. So thank you so much, Dr. Quezada, for joining us. I think I think I can unmute you right now.
All right, thank you so much for that warm welcome and introduction. I really want to commend Dr. Ajanaku for taking the initiative to found such a wonderful program. I'm always so grateful to see people who see a need and act on that and make change. So I think it's wonderful what you're doing. I'm also very grateful to my 2 wonderful students who are here with us today. I'll actually let you both have a chance to introduce yourselves if you just want to say your name and what year you're in and anything else you want to share with the group today. So Angelique, how about you go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Angelique Ely. I'm a first-year medical student, and I actually graduated from Bowie State University in 2017. I took 2 gap years and did health disparities and retrovirus research at the NIH.
Awesome. Thank you, Angelique. And Kayla.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. My name is Kayla, and I graduated from Emory University in 2018. And I also took 2 gap years to do biomedical research at the NIH.
All right, excellent. Thank you again for you both for being here. I do have a few slides just to kind of help me remember points that I want to make and things I want to share. But I also did receive the questions that you all very thoughtfully submitted ahead of time. And so Angelique and Kaila are going to be especially helpful in answering those questions for you, because I always think that oftentimes the student perspective can be sometimes even more valuable than from those of us who are a little bit farther from the process. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And there's actually, it's interesting, there's a theme here, because both Angelique and Kaila mentioned taking a couple years between undergrad and medical school, and that happened to me too. So you could say that my path to medicine was anything but straight and narrow. There were definitely a lot of twists and turns. And so I first applied in 1999 when I was intending to go straight from undergrad right into medical school. At least that was my plan at the time. And I didn't have great mentorship or advising, just again, to speak to Dr. Ajanaku's point of how important it is to have a program like this where you get access to this kind of information and sort of stay focused and engaged. My school that I went to didn't have like a pre-med program. We actually didn't have pre-med advisors. So, and I'm a first generation on many levels. So first generation born in this country, first generation to go to college. And I say first generation to go to med school, but that's assuming that there will be other generations. I'm still the only person in my family in medicine. So in many ways, I felt like I was sort of fumbling around and just trying to figure out what am I supposed to be doing now, and who should I even talk to or ask about certain questions. And yet, as you can see, things did end up working out. I was very fortunate to have a great friend who was also applying to medical school. And between the two of us, we would kind of help keep each other informed about what we had learned, that there was this thing called the MCAT that we have to take, that there's this thing called the MCAS application that we have to submit. So that said, I think because of not having sort of all the information or being able to benefit from more insiders kind of information, I applied very late in the cycle, which can put you at a disadvantage. And I also applied without really having any kind of clinical exposure at all. It really truly was, I sensed that I had a calling, that there was something special that I wanted to do. I always loved the sciences. I loved the concept of being there for another human being in need and for supporting their health. I mean, that was something that was very important to me, but I really couldn't speak to personal clinical experience. And so maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but again, thanks to not having much advising, I didn't get in the first time when I applied to medical school. And so these are the times when I would say my faith definitely was very important, definitely got me through. I think otherwise I might have given up. I might have gotten very, very just sort of distraught and decided to go a different way. But because I really had a lot of faith and felt that God wants this for me, that there's a plan for me. And I ended up going to another program. And Dr. Ajanaku mentioned my master's in human nutrition at Columbia University. This was what I decided I would do in my first gap year, I guess, was to get that degree. It's so interesting how what I originally thought was something terrible that happened to me because I didn't go straight into medical school ended up being wonderful, because this program was an excellent program that actually gave me a lot more academic preparation than I think I had from undergrad, and I benefited from that a lot in medical school. It also allowed me to volunteer in the hospital, and I got trained and started volunteering as a English-Spanish medical interpreter, and suddenly was very much in the space of seeing patient-physician interactions and even basically being the bridge of their communication. So very valuable clinical experience. And that ended up being, I think, really, really important, not only because now I could say that I had clinical experience, but it really inspired me that much more. And it gave me so much more understanding and insight into why this was the right decision. So that then when I reapplied earlier in the cycle with ample clinical experience, I was fortunate to be successful at that point. And then while in medical school, I started to apply my previous experience as a medical Spanish interpreter to help start a medical Spanish program as a medical student. And that program has evolved over time, and now I teach that course in the medical school. It's now a formal course elective. So it's neat how, again, I think Dr. Ajanaku said about having an open heart. I think sometimes like having that openness and really sort of learning and looking at, okay, this isn't what I was planning for, or this isn't what I thought it was supposed to be, or the way it was supposed to go, but recognizing it as an opportunity to learn something. And then also, you know, you never know how those unexpected turns end up actually being a wonderful addition to your journey that ultimately takes you to an even better destination than you thought. In medical school, I should add that I decided to volunteer as an interviewer for the admissions committee, and even was invited to serve on the committee. And so I stayed in touch with the admissions office through my residency and fellowship, because I did all of my training at Maryland. And ultimately, when I was finishing up my fellowship, then I got invited essentially if I wanted to stay on as assistant dean for admissions, which was not an easy decision to make. But I'm very glad I did, because it is a really wonderful and inspiring role for me. I love doing this. I love talking to people about medicine and helping them find their path, since, you know, I had to do a lot of reflection, certainly on my own. And just in terms of GI, I chose GI because actually, this probably does also loop back to the degree in nutrition. When I was sitting in those nutrition courses, we had a gastroenterologist come present on the digestive system. And I remember thinking just how cool and interesting that is, how it just makes sense. You know, things come in this way, they go out that way, important things happen in the middle. And I really loved the idea of being able to choose a specialty where I could apply this knowledge in nutrition that I had acquired during that time before medical school. I also like that there are some procedural aspects to it, as well as some very sort of internist, very thoughtful diagnostician parts about it as well. You have to take a very good history, ask the right questions, be able to develop that bond and trust with your patients, so that you can talk about sometimes some very personal things that most people don't necessarily always want to share with someone they've just met. But you do that because, you know, you can really just bring so much joy in someone's life and make a really big difference when you can help them feel better. So that's a little bit about my story and sort of how I ended up where I am. I wanted to share, though, you know, I know we're here to talk about chasing the dream, as this session's been entitled, and about applying to medicine and ultimately pursuing a career in medicine. And one of the most common questions I get anytime I go to a recruitment event is, what are you looking for in a medical student? That's always the first question usually that I get. So I hope this diagram kind of shows that we at Maryland do holistic review of applications, which means that we really truly read through the entire application, and we're equally balancing multiple different aspects of the application. Yes, we're looking at the academic potential and scholarship of the applicant. We're also looking at whether or not this applicant has a heart for service, and how has that played out? How can we observe that through their engagement with the community? We also look at whether or not the applicant has had the opportunity to gain some kind of clinical exposure, again, to give them a better insight and make sure that they really had the opportunity to think through a very important life decision to commit to this career. And we also want to make sure that we're selecting individuals who are very, very strong at being able to communicate effectively and develop those important relationships with their patients and with their colleagues. And some of that, especially that last one, I think is maybe the most difficult one to tell from an application. But I can tell you, because every year I read thousands and thousands of applications, that you do start to tell. You do start to see in the way someone writes and someone describes their experiences and what they've reflected and what they've learned from those experiences says a lot about that individual, about their perspective, and maybe about their what's important to them and how they will ultimately take care of their future patients. So I fully recognize that in the midst of a pandemic, a lot of these things are challenging. It's been difficult for people, certainly in the last year, to get exposure in clinical settings, to even be able to engage in in-person service in the community, and even some research activities I know have been also interrupted for a lot of people. So I first and foremost want to reassure the group that across the nation, admissions leaders, admissions deans and officers we're all talking about this constantly. We've been talking about this for a year already, recognizing that this year will probably be, applicants will be impacted by the pandemic more even than last year. And so at least at Maryland, and I think this is true honestly for a lot of institutions, we've never had like a minimum number of hours that we expect somebody to have completed within any of these potential areas. We care a lot about the value and the quality of those experiences, and again, how the individual describes them, so that somebody could have, in theory, had hundreds of hours of, say, physician shadowing or scribing, but they basically just list 500 hours shadowing Dr. So-and-so, whereas somebody else who maybe had much less than that, but really writes very thoughtfully about, just such a very humanistic perspective about what the patient's experience was and how they envisioned, or how they were able to observe the interaction between the physician and patient and how they envisioned themselves being in that role. I mean, I will feel much more fulfilled reading that and comfortable. This person is in it for the right reasons. So we've always really cared more about the quality than the quantity. And we also are aware that there are some remote or virtual kind of experiences that have emerged in the pandemic. So people have been doing remote service activities like tutoring or crisis text lines. There's even teleshadowing and telescribing. We've seen some of that. So we know people are getting engaged in virtual activities, and we think that's great. We want to see and like to see that people are being adaptable and are resourceful and finding, some way to stay connected, to stay engaged throughout this time, and especially recognizing that sometimes, there are intergenerational homes, and maybe there's a loved one at home that you didn't want to put at risk by doing something in person. Just know that we're all very thoughtful about that, and we're certainly thinking about that. Anything prior to the pandemic, hopefully some people have had the opportunity, if they're applying this year, hopefully they've been thinking about this for more than just the 1 year. And maybe you've had some exposure, some things in person. And if you do, by all means, you should list those things. But I think everyone is sort of prepared and expecting to see that there won't be sort of huge numbers of hours engaging in these kind of activities. But we can answer some more of those questions, because I know that's part of the question list for later. There was a question about the personal statement, and I guess just the one thing I want to comment on here, I already said about how much we value your writing in the application, everything that you write, your personal statement, how you describe the activities, your answers in the secondary. Basically, this is how we're getting to know you through the application, and how you can showcase who you are and really entice us and make us want to bring you in for an interview. And one of the most important things with the personal statement is when we finish reading that, we want to feel like we understand why you're pursuing this very demanding pathway, that you have clearly shown what your motivation for medicine is. So you don't have to necessarily think that you need to stand out by saying, coming up with some very shocking or outrageous kind of story, which sometimes some people do. We really just want authenticity. We want it to be honest and to be who, again, to reveal who you are and what your reasoning and your story is. I already talked about that and the secondaries. Sometimes the secondaries might feel a little redundant with the primary, because you're listing clinical experiences and service experiences. And then in the secondary, we do, and I know some other schools do too, we'll ask you, to share what was your most valuable or your most important clinical experience or service activity. And we really are just interested to see which of your experiences you want to highlight. And maybe in the case that if maybe you only have one clinical experience to discuss, then I would just go into some more depth and detail about why this was such a very valuable and important experience to you. Again, what you learned about it and how it helped shape your motivation for medicine. Certainly, letters of recommendation also can be helpful. We require a letter if you have a pre-med health committee, advisory committee rather, then we do require that. But either way, whoever you're asking to write a letter for you, always make sure that they know you really well. And I remember I used to be very, very shy and have a very hard time asking anyone to write a letter for me. And I got a little bit better at it when, I can't remember who told me this, but at some point I finally figured out, I was like, you know what, that person who's now positioned to write me a letter is there because somebody else at some point wrote a letter for them, right, to be there. And now they want to pay it forward. And hopefully if it's someone that you have a good relationship with and you're confident that they will write you a strong letter, then that's the kind of letter that also helps your application and makes us want to interview you. All right, so hopefully then we bring you in, we invite you for an interview. Because of rolling admissions, I mentioned how I struggled my first time I applied because I applied late in the process. It's not that if you apply late, it's impossible, but your odds are much better if you apply earlier because we have more spots in the class. And so really everything along that cycle, the earlier you can complete it, the better, the more to your advantage. So the primary application, the secondary, once you get invited for an interview, try to interview earlier in the year if you can, rather than putting it off until February or March. Again, you could still very well get accepted with a later interview, but it will be better if you interview earlier. On your interview day, whether it's in person or virtual, and this past year we did do virtual interviews, make sure you dress professionally and just review your application, be ready and comfortable with discussing anything that you've written on your application. We do have our interviewers review them beforehand, so they'll have some understanding about questions and things that you all can have a conversation about. Other medical schools have a different format for interviews. So ours are 2 one-on-one conversations with either 2 faculty members or 1 faculty and 1 student. But some schools do what's called the multiple mini interview. I don't know if maybe Angelique or Kayla did those. So actually, Angelique, I totally remember having a conversation with you about that on your interview day. That's so funny. So she could probably tell you better than I could about the format there. But either way, I think being on time, dress professionally, be yourself, will be a great way to prepare for your interview day. Just a few more words about our curriculum that I wanted to share, because we launched our Renaissance curriculum this summer. Both Angelique and Kayla are first years, so they have experience with this curriculum. And our objective with the Renaissance curriculum is to train lifelong learners who are clinically excellent, possess humanism, professionalism, scholarship, leadership, critical thinking skills, and attention to social justice and diversity. I wanted to highlight a couple elective tracks that we have in our program. So in addition to our Renaissance curriculum, where you are learning about anatomy, physiology, as well as pathophysiology and how to treat diseases, all in a system-based format. During your pre-clerkship content, which usually goes to or should go to about March of so mid-spring of your second year. And then you prepare for the step 1 test, which is the sort of next standardized test that you take after the MCAT, because unfortunately the MCAT's not the last one that you take in medicine. I would be very happy if we do away with more of these or change them. The good news is step 1, which is still to this day is still gives you a numerical score starting 2022, we'll move to a pass-fail format, which personally I think is a great decision. And I'm advocating for making the MCAT pass-fail as well on a national level. But in the interim, it's nice to have this more flexible time with the Renaissance curriculum. We didn't have a lot of time with the previous curriculum. Our first year students were finishing their second year, basically right up till mid-May, and then had only about 4 to 6 weeks to prepare for step one, which can work for a lot of folks. But I think that, you know, sometimes things happen and you need to maybe push things back, or you need a lot extra time. The fact that you finish your courses in March does allow for some more flexibility now, if that's something that you choose to do. Otherwise, if you sort of stay on that time frame, or within even an 8-week time frame, you'll still have an opportunity to start your clinical rotations in the hospital earlier. So that's pretty neat too. So our students now have additional months where they can see more specialties and really continue to explore even more options in medicine, even though I think GI is the most fun. So we also always incorporate, well, and obviously I love internal medicine. So, you know, we're internists and GI. But let's be honest, Dr. Ajanaku remembers and knows much more than I do about like many, many things that I haven't thought about in a long time.
Sure, I'm quite sure.
And we at Maryland are very, very conscientious about student feedback. We always have been, and especially I think in the process of the curriculum renewal and the Renaissance curriculum development, we had a lot of students on all of our work groups to help us shape what the new curriculum would be, how it would look. And we continue to welcome student feedback to keep tweaking and evolving and making sure that we're better than we were the day before. So we always want to hear from our students. We do have a house advisory system. And I think it's probably, I don't know how well it's all planned out from a pandemic standpoint. I think and hope that as we're all hoping to move back into a more primarily in-person format in the fall, that there will be even more engagement and connection with the house advisory system. But basically, this is designed to give you a group of students throughout the 4 years and a faculty advisor from day one when you come in as a first year student. And I remember, actually, I was also assigned a faculty advisor who I ended up not interacting with as much, but through that person, I met another faculty member that really ended up becoming my mentor moving forward. So again, these connections are important. You never know how they will help lead you on your own journey. We have a lot of different student activity interest groups, and we have a student diversity council. And there's actually, I should update this slide because our awesome Student Diversity Council continues to evolve as well. So it originally included SNMA, LMSA, APAMSA, the LGBTQ+ health interest group, and women in medicine. It now also includes White Coats for Black Lives and SAMHSA, the South Asian Medical Student Association. Am I forgetting anyone else, ladies? I think those are the two groups that aren't on here, right?
Yes. Perfect.
There are also some groups that are not necessarily medically related, that, you know, they're running groups. There's a a cappella group called Hippocratic Notes. So a lot of ways to build community at the School of Medicine. So the other question that I often get is not just what are you looking for in a student, but sometimes they say, well, you know, how would you describe Maryland, or what's special about Maryland? Hopefully I've given you something of that through talking about our curriculum. But in general, I think one of the things I love the most about it is you really get to learn from faculty who love to teach, who genuinely want to create a warm and inclusive learning environment. You will have early access to clinical experiences and have the opportunity to serve a diverse patient population here in Baltimore, and a lot of research opportunities that will be built into your curriculum as well. So I will end with my sort of more formal presentation there. I did want to make sure that you saw our website as well as an email address. If you ever, after today, think of more questions, please don't ever hesitate to reach out and ask us these questions, and can always follow us on social media as well. But now I'm going to move to the questions, because there were questions. So here was the first one. How do you anticipate the COVID pandemic? Actually, Angelique, do you want to read this one? Go ahead.
Sure. How do you anticipate the COVID pandemic will impact this year's applicants? What are admission committees going to be focused on instead of shadowing patient exposure as a result of the pandemic? And is virtual shadowing acceptable?
Thank you. And so hopefully, I think I addressed this at least in part. Again, as far as what we're going to be focusing on, for us, it's not a huge change to be able to say that we're going to not focus so much on the amount of time that you spent in any clinical experience, and it's going to be much more about the what you learned, your reflection of that experience. Now, I will say, if you're someone who, like me, the first time I applied, has absolutely no clinical experience at all, whether it's in person or virtual, there's nothing clinical, then this may not be a good time to apply to medicine. I do think that we all owe it to ourselves to give ourselves some exposure in working with patients. Again, even if it's a remote interaction, which honestly, I've been doing a year of telehealth now, so I don't think it's going away either. So I do think that having that virtual experience working with patients is of value for sure. And there are virtual shadowing or teleshadowing programs that I've seen pop up. And it seems to me that the format that I see more often is something more like, if I were, for example, to present my journey or present what a normal day is like for me, say when I go to do my colonoscopy, colon cancer screening day at the VA, and I would tell you my schedule and share a little bit about what that is like to basically be a gastroenterologist, and then answer questions. That I've seen that be called virtual shadowing. I've also seen virtual shadowing where the student or participant is able to actually join in, say on a Zoom call between a physician and patient, and observe the conversation, which more simulates, I think, what in-person shadowing would have been. So I would argue they're both acceptable in that you should include them on your application. I think any of these efforts that you've put to get some exposure, especially in a time when it was almost impossible to get any, will be seen positively. I don't know that some will see it as necessarily that it replaces, for example, the in-person shadowing per se. If you saw me do some questions, saw me give a presentation on my typical day and answer some questions, but I still think it's a positive. I still think that it gives you some kind of insight. And again, how you describe it is going to be really, really important. So if you really do a nice job, I think sharing what your reflection was on whichever your experience is, I think that'll be really of benefit to you and to your application. All right, Kaila, do you want to read this one? And go ahead and tell me what you think a good answer is here.
Oh, okay. So the question is, what is the best way to stand out as an applicant? Okay, give me a second to think of a good answer.
Yeah, this is a hard one. So, Angelique, you can jump in too. Maybe I'll go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I when I interviewed at other schools that I kind of got complimented on was just being like my true authentic self. Like that kind of came through the application, and that was kind of cohesive with how I interviewed, like it was consistent throughout. And so I think kind of like for me, the biggest benefit to my application was just taking my time to be as genuine and authentic as I possibly could, because that showed through my interview and everything else.
Absolutely. That's an awesome answer. What do you think, Kaila?
Yeah, so I guess I can only talk about it from my own perspective and what I think helped me stand out. I personally am a pretty indecisive person, which is why it took me 2 years extra to decide to go to medical school. But I think that also allowed me to really think about every experience that I had and how that each contributed to like getting one step closer to medicine and like understanding that. So I guess just being able to talk about all your experiences and what you really learned from them and how that helped you become the person that you are and like actually be confident in the decision to wanting to become a physician, because it's really a lifelong commitment. So I was like, okay, if I'm doing this, it's no joke. Like, let's be sure about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree with both of my wonderful, awesome students. So, you know, and actually I think they both highlighted different parts of being an applicant and how you can stand out in different ways. Because to me, Kaila's point is more about the application, and Angelique's, it was actually, you could say our application, but also the interview day. And the interview experience. And so it's absolutely true. Just like I said before, like, don't feel like you need to stand out by saying or something like weird or outrageous or kind of bizarre, which people do. You don't want to stand out for the wrong reasons. Like, you don't want to be like, oh no, what am I reading? And that does happen. Again, I think both of them really hit the nail on the head about just being authentic, be genuine, and have really thought through what your reasoning is and be able to articulate that very, very clearly and honestly in your writing, in your application, and then on your interview day. And I think being positive on your interview day and just in life in general, probably, certainly in medicine, keeping a positive attitude, smiling, and even when there's like a setback, just sort of like pausing and thinking to yourself, okay, there's a lesson here for me to learn. Somehow I'm going to learn from this experience. I think having that mentality, that sometimes they call it a growth mindset, is a really, really valuable quality. And anyway, I'm digressing a little bit, but I do think that sometimes you perceive some of that positive energy from someone, even when you're reading the application or you're interacting with that person on their interview day. And so, and yes, you know, both Kayla and Angelique stood out to me on their interview day. And then we remember them even better than when we're discussing final decisions with the committee. And we're like, oh yeah, I remember it. I'm like, yeah, Angelique I talked for like 10 minutes before. But yeah, like I delayed my presentation because I was having so much fun having a conversation with her. Like, I could completely remember that. So I think that's really great advice you heard from my students. And another, again, I can't reinforce enough, just in terms of giving yourself an advantage. If you're able to apply and submit your materials earlier in the cycle, that's also sort of a way to stand out in a positive way. That I think it gives you a very important advantage. All right, I'll read this one. When is the best time to start drafting one's personal statement? And how do you recommend cohesively synthesizing one's personal statement effectively to get the point across? And I definitely felt like my students need to jump in here, because you wrote your personal statements a lot more recently, although I've written a lot of personal statements because they're from med school and residency and fellowship, but it's been a while. So I would love to hear from you all about the timing and how did you put it all together?
Go ahead, Anj.
Okay.
You want to go first?
Okay. So I actually started writing my personal statement October, the year before applications, only because I heard that it would take a couple of drafts, and they weren't lying. I probably did like 8 drafts of my personal statement, only because I wanted to get all of my thoughts out. And it actually just took a while to like think about what I wanted to include. So like the first couple of drafts, I didn't even care about the character limit. I just got everything out. You know, I talked to my mom about personal experiences. Like, it really was like a soul search. That sounds dramatic, but it really was. And then the last couple of months, I took kind of chopping down content and then circulating it around to get like editing for content, grammar. I sent it to my PI to make sure I was discussing my science effectively. And I like trafficked it around a little bit to get people who I felt had really valuable opinions, their edits. And then I just refined it probably the last 2 months, but I went through like about 8 drafts. So I would say get started as early as you possibly can.
Yeah, definitely agree with wanting to start as early as possible. So I actually started the process of applying to med school to only take 1 gap year. So I started writing it the previous year, and I took maybe like a few weeks to write a personal statement. But then I decided I'm not applying to med school yet, so I just kind of tossed that. So around February of the year when I did apply to med school, I looked at my old personal statement and I hated it, so I just tossed it out. So I started writing it in February, and I wanted to outline it first. So, you know, they always talked about like, you want to make sure you're telling a story, and it basically just has to say like, why'd you want to become a doctor? So I went with just chronologically, like starting with the first thing that just like initially sparked my interest in medicine, and just like the following kinds of activities and experiences that I had that brought me closer. So I probably spent like from February to April, I want to say, writing it out. And then I had about a month when I passed it around to different people. So I didn't give it to my parents because I was too shy to have them read it. It felt too vulnerable. I don't know why. But I did want to give it to like some people who I knew that were in med school. I gave it to my research PI, so research mentor. I also gave it to friends who weren't into medicine at all, but were just like good at writing and knew me as a person, just to make sure my voice was heard throughout. But I think it is also good to take a good amount of time to write it so that you know the things in your personal statement that you definitely want to keep, because you're going to get so many conflicting advice to change one thing and then somebody will say the exact opposite. So you want to know like what is definitely going to stay and what do you think like, okay, I agree with you, like I could change this or take that out or whatever.
All right. So see, I knew they were gonna answer better than me, because I think I should have done more of what they did, which was give myself a lot more time. I love how they planned ahead and gave themselves a lot of time, because then you have that flexibility. There's less pressure, right? You're not feeling like I have to finish this like this week, or I have to do, crank this thing out right now. You have some room to breathe and think about it, put it down, walk away from it, come back to it, look at it again. And you have that flexibility to say, I want to change it. I want to do something different, or I want to throw it out and start all over again. And that's okay, because I have time to do that. So I think allowing yourself as much time as you can to kind of work at it a little bit over time is very wise, sage advice. And even if you're applying this cycle and you haven't started, then there's no better time than the present. You can try to give yourself as much time as you can and just start working at it, chip away. And the other great advice that you heard here was, let other people take a look at it. Please don't let your eyes be the only set of eyes that has seen your personal statement. There are a lot of statements too that I feel like I wish like, oh, if only they could have just shown it to one other person. Somebody probably would have given them the feedback like, there's a better way to say what you're trying to say here. And so when you ask for that feedback and that advice, really do it from a place of humility and be open and welcome to that feedback, that constructive feedback that, these people that you've reached out to because you value their opinion and you trust them, are trying to help you. And I think that's all awesome advice. And then I think that in doing those things that we just said, that's how you ultimately are able to cohesively synthesize and bring things together. You're giving yourself more time to remember things, to think about what you want to include. Kyla mentioned even like an outline or a list of what are some of the things I feel like I need to include here. And then just over time, seeing how all these pieces really do fit together. And maybe seeing some that you realize, actually, this is, yes, it's part of my story, but maybe I don't need to include that in my personal statement. So getting that, I think that's another thing to get good feedback on from your advisor, your mentors, etc. So when would you recommend taking a gap year? Well, you see 3 women here who have taken a couple gap years. And honestly, this is definitely something, again, where I always like to stress that everyone's journey is different. And there are people who, for them, it's the right decision to go straight through. I will share that at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, it's been many, many years, more than a decade for sure, that the majority of our students that come in have taken at least 1 to 3 years of time off. Most often 1 and 2 years is the most common, but some people take more than that. So we definitely don't see it as a negative. We also, again, we're not a school that requires it or expects it necessarily, because again, for some, it's okay to go through. But I think taking a gap year makes sense if you feel like there are experiences that you still need to gain before going to medical school. Maybe you really do realize that you would benefit from getting some additional clinical exposure, for example. Or maybe you're involved in a program in research or in a service program that you really want to gain that additional year of experience under your belt before you shift gears and really focus 100% on your medical career. Again, this is a place where talking to your advisors, talking to friends, family, mentors, people who, again, whose opinion you really value can be helpful. And at the end of the day, it's going to be your decision. But I guess I already hopefully shared with you how valuable it was to me to take time off. I mean, my time off ended up being a total of 3 years. And gosh, I'm so grateful for all of it. It all really, really made me the physician that I am today. I don't think I'd be doing a lot of the things that I'm doing now if I hadn't taken that time off. Angelique and Kaela, do you want to add anything here since you also both took some time off?
Well, I mentioned how I was indecisive about even applying to medical school. So that was a big reason for me wanting to take some time off. And that's why I did 2 years instead of 1, because when you only take 1 year, it's not much of a gap year because you start the application process senior year of college. I also think that I was feeling pretty burnt out academically by the end of my college experience. So it just would have been a lot of pressure for me personally to have to go like straight through college and just that competitive atmosphere and then going into med school with like even more studying and everything, which is why I really needed that time of self-reflection. And I think during that gap year, or my 2 gap years, I was able to really just know myself more and know that my value is more than just grades and numbers and things like that. And you can still do well without being like at the top of your class and everything. It's just about being the best person you can be. So highly recommend if you're thinking about it.
Absolutely. Awesome. All right. Oh, go ahead, Angelique.
I was just going to say 1,000% agree with Kaela. We were both at the NIH, and actually I met her. We were volunteering for DC Central Kitchen. We've cut mangoes together. But yeah, I think for me, I just wanted to do a little bit more exploration. Like I wasn't super sure if I wanted to do a PhD or an MD or an MD PhD because I hadn't really explored the avenue. And so I really just wanted to make super duper sure that like an MD is what I wanted to do. And so I really just spent that time, you know, getting into like academic research, but also doing volunteering at like the clinical center. And I got really into health disparities. And so I really just like explored my options so I could really narrow down and like confidently make a decision that an MD was for me. And I think that time was really valuable for that.
All right. Thank you both for your input there. Any tips for virtual interviewing? So as I mentioned before, because both Kaela and Angelique got to interview in person, you know, this year we did do virtual interviews, and we have already decided we're going to continue with virtual interviews for this next cycle. Although the good news is that we're hoping that we should be able to balance that with some opportunities to come visit the campus throughout the year, do some tours, and have an in-person second look experience next year in the spring. But in terms of the interview itself, we're still planning to do it virtually again. It actually worked out pretty well. It worked out better, I think, than many of us thought it would. It went very smoothly. Both our faculty and our applicants just rolled with it beautifully. And I think in many ways, it didn't feel that different than when we've done some of the in-person interviews. So I think that, if anything, I was very, very impressed by our applicants who were just very poised and professional and behaved on the virtual interview just as professionally as they would if had it been an in-person interview day. So I think, again, dressing in your suit as you normally would have if you were coming in person that day probably also just helps you get into that mindset when you're dressed a certain way, that you're going to behave a certain way. Again, preparing by rereading your application materials and just making sure that you're familiar and remember all the things that you've shared, and even thinking more about how you want to discuss some of those, what potential questions you think you might be asked, and just be prepared to share and discuss those items on your application that you've written about. And I think most of our applicants actually, even though I think it was like halfway through because it didn't even work out in the beginning. In the beginning, for some reason, the Zoom feature wasn't allowing anyone to use any virtual backgrounds. But then halfway it did, and it kind of didn't make a difference because everybody chose to show their own background. So I think either one would have been fine. But everybody who, who interviewed with us remotely, I felt like found a quiet place. I think that's a really important thing. Hopefully a place that's quiet, where you feel comfortable, and where you'll, and we do build into the virtual interview day some breaks here and there so that you're not like plugged to the computer for like 4 or 5 hours straight. We realize that that's not healthy for anybody. So we definitely make sure that you have a couple breaks if so that you're able to do that. But I think just kind of in many ways preparing for it similarly to how you would have done it in person, and just making sure that you've got a good connection, that you know where you can have a fairly stable connection. Even so, we do make sure to give everyone backup plans just in case that becomes necessary. We were very fortunate this year that we really didn't have too much problems with that. I think in the beginning, there were a couple of people who got kicked off who ended up finishing their interview over the phone, which is it was one of the backup plan options to at least complete your conversation. At least you'd have the opportunity, though, to engage and have some face-to-face interaction over Zoom. So I think, again, like many things, bringing your authentic self, your smile, being ready to talk about your application, and being on time. I think all of those things work well. And if you do choose to use a background, you want to use a virtual background, by all means you can. And I think a lot of people who did do that at other programs would, for example, maybe use a background from your institution that you're at, or maybe a place that you're working, like say if you're NIH, I'm sure NIH has a background that you could use that, or your undergraduate or graduate institution. Those are a couple examples of backgrounds. We also actually lent people Maryland backgrounds. If somebody wanted to use our background, they could use that too. So we really wanted to make sure it was very comfortable for folks. But the good news is actually that was one of the comments that we got from our faculty, was that they noticed that actually the applicants seemed more comfortable with the virtual interviews, and maybe because it was, it was less often or less likely that somebody was sort of stressed because they were running late trying to just find where someone's office was, or the comfort of being in your own space that you've chosen to do the interview, I think can also sometimes be a benefit of this method. So those are my tips. And we do make sure that we post tips on our website. And also when you get the invitation for your interview, we give you some additional tips along with that invitation so that you don't have to memorize all this stuff I just said. You would get that in your invitation as well. All right, this one is definitely a good one to go back to our students. Any advice on drafting a school list, which I assume means on sort of coming together on your decision. Maybe there's somebody in this group who's already got multiple acceptances or something, and you're trying to decide which medical school to go to. I hope I'm understanding the nature of the question.
I think I understood the question as gathering your list of schools to apply to.
Ah, okay.
Yes, I think that's
Excellent.
the question.
Thank you.
I'll say for me, so I was advised to first figure out about how many schools you want to apply to. It's very expensive, so money kind of dictated how many schools I applied to. And then I was told to have like 3 categories, and about a third of your schools being like maybe reach schools based on your MCAT and GPA pretty much. And then another category of schools where you fit like in the middle of MCAT GPA, and then other schools where like you're on the higher end, so you're a little more likely to get into. Obviously, you can't really predict. I made that list. There were reach schools that I got into. There were lower tier schools I didn't even get an interview. So, but it's more just to make sure you have a wide range. And I also made my list based a lot on location. So I knew areas of the country where I just had no desire to live in. Like I knew I wasn't going to apply to any West Coast schools. I knew that I wanted to be warm, so I wanted to apply to some schools in the South. I'm from Maryland, so that's why Maryland went on my list pretty quickly. Yeah, and then I guess for deciding on a school, like once you have, if you have multiple acceptances, it just has to be where the vibe feels the best. Like it's really just an internal feeling. Yeah, I ended up going with Maryland because I am in state. The financial aid package was the best of the schools that I had. I also went to the diversity dinner, which we didn't have this year, kind of, but the one that we had in person last year, that was like a big driving factor. So just getting to know the students, and if you feel like you could fit in with the students, then it's probably a good school for you.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I kind of did the same thing. I did like 5 reach schools, about like 8 in the middle schools where I like had a good chance, but it was still kind of up in the air. And then like 5 schools that I was pretty confident that I'd get into. And then, so that like the best advice that I got was like apply broadly, but like realistically. So based on your GPA and your like extracurriculars and your MCAT score, you know, like don't waste your applications applying to like Harvard if you know that like you're probably not going to get in. Like do like reach schools that are still like realistic. And then again, like Kyla said, like application and interviewing is very, very expensive. I know like this season is kind of virtual interview, but when we were applying, you had to pay for everything out of pocket. And so being really particular about where I applied, and then when I got interviews, where I interviewed at, depending on my ranking, was super important. And then when I got there, I spent a lot of time, kind of like Kyla said, filling out the vibe. So filling out the students, kind of like seeing how the students interacted with the faculty on staff. I took a look at their hospitals and looked at their like patient population. Like there was one school that I interviewed at, they had 2 hospitals. Like they had like the hospital associated with like the university, and then they had their community hospital. And I noticed that the community hospital had essentially like all Black folk and minority folks, and then the hospital associated with their university was white folks. And then that really turned me off to the school. So like look at things that like are important to you. And so then when you're making your decision, of course, money is like a huge factor where you can afford to go, but also you want to go someplace that feels like home and that you feel comfortable. And for me, Maryland felt very homey. So that's why I chose to come here.
Yay. That just makes me happy because Maryland is my home too. So and I don't mean that just because my family, I mean, the University of Maryland School of Medicine has definitely been a home for me. And so it always makes me feel very warm-hearted and happy when I know that that's the feeling that our students still have. That was excellent advice. And actually that same process will happen again when you're applying for residencies and for fellowships. You kind of do a similar kind of breakdown. So that was excellent. What is the best way to address red flags like a low GPA or MCAT score or failing a core science in your application? So a lot of the, and I can't say like all of them, but I think a lot, and certainly at Maryland, we have actually a question and space in our secondary application to provide you an opportunity to explain if there was any kind of area of academic difficulty, whether that was a low grade or a low score, or even like a low semester. Basically, if there was something that you want to provide context for and explain what happened, then we want you to take advantage of that and give us that insight, and just help us understand maybe why that you had trouble with that course, or what happened during the MCAT. But mostly, I think, again, remember how I said that every setback or every challenge is an opportunity to learn? That's a theme that I think should be in that answer. So even as you clearly experienced a challenge there, it's really, really wonderful to see in your answer how you learned from that experience, and how were you able to gain from that to then perform better, or that it then translated into you being able to develop skills that now you've grown from and improved moving forward in your academic career. So not just to say, well, this was happening during this time and this is why I didn't perform well. Yes, include that, and then say, and then because of that, I realized that in the future I needed to do this, and I asked for help, and these are the resources that I use now when that sort of challenge or situation presents itself, or in order to prevent that from happening. So the best way to address that kind of thing, I think, is to be very, again, honest and transparent with your experience, and then also just showing us how you've learned and grown from it. So actually, that was it. That is my last slide. We're actually even a few minutes early, which is actually good. I'm going to stop sharing here because I did want to have a little bit of extra time in case anyone had any other questions that occurred to you while we were chatting, aside from the pre-submitted questions. Feel free to raise your hand or unmute.
Yeah, you can speak, or you can put it in the chat, or send us a personal message to Dr. Quezada or any of the students if you have a question.
I guess while we're here, I have a question. Does anybody know that they're applying this cycle or this year? Is anyone applying this year? You can just say yes in the chat.
I am.
All right, excellent. So and I see some other, well, we have a lot of Mary and Tasha's. So thank you to Mary and Tasha for sharing her link.
I think that's a technical glitch, because I put Mary and Tasha.
You probably shared her link. Yeah, don't worry.
I think we're all different people.
No, they definitely are. I'm sure that she was very helpful and shared her link to her friends, and so that happens. So I see here, what if there's been a class I needed to take multiple times to get through? Again, I think that hopefully what we see is that as you've taken it, that you've learned from it, that you improved the second or third or more times that you took it. And then in that portion of the secondary, I would definitely address that and explain. And it could very well just be, I mean, I've seen very well written explanations of students who say, this is a really tough course for me, and I've put in the time, I've reached out, I've asked for help, I created study cards, and I did this, and these are the things, and this is what it took for me to be successful. Because med school is hard. Med school is really, really, really hard. It is harder than a lot of, I think, undergraduate programs. And so for me, actually, when somebody has come up against an academic challenge and faced it head on and kind of developed that self-awareness now, that's like, okay, I know that if I don't ask for help, or I don't do these additional things, you know, I'm going to be in trouble here. I think that's a good skill set and a good thing to have that self-awareness. And so just, again, coming from that mindset and framing your response that way will really be important.
I think we have another question.
Sure.
I've heard a lot of different things about the content of a personal statement. Some advisors say not to include anything that you talk about in other parts of your essay, like your main experiences, and others say that it's okay to double dip per se. What are your thoughts on balancing the personal statement with other parts of the application?
Oh yeah, you absolutely can, I don't like that double dip term, but you can talk about things that you've mentioned elsewhere in the application by all means. Don't feel like you have to like ration out like this I can discuss here and that I can discuss there. There can be overlap and intersection throughout the application. So if there's something that you describe in your activities and it's a valuable experience that you want to elaborate further on and really embed in your personal statement, by all means, you should do that. There's definitely, in fact, I can honestly tell you, again, I read thousands and thousands of applications every year. A lot of people do this and do it very nicely. So again, I think if you work on your application and let other people read it and give yourself time to edit and stuff, you can do that very well. So no need to think you can't, you know, repeat experiences in different parts of the application. Does the college you go to play a role in how the committee views an applicant? Nope. We honestly like to receive applications from as many different colleges and universities across the country and even outside the US in many cases. So, I mean, we really like to see that diversity as well on so many levels. So if anything, the one thing that I will say is I know that Harvard inflates grades a lot. So we do take maybe that into consideration, but otherwise, we want to see a lot of different colleges and universities. There's no preference given. It really is more just about your journey in general and how it all fits. So go to the, you know, I presume most of you already might be in college. Is anybody in high school, Dr. Ajanaku?
It's mostly college.
Okay.
I don't think we have a lot of high school students here.
Yep, that sounds good. Nope. We like big schools, small schools, liberal arts schools, you know, what you name it. There's no preference.
Can I jump in here, Dr. Quezada, really quickly?
Oh, sure.
This was actually something that I was really insecure about when I was applying, because I transferred schools between freshman and sophomore year from a liberal arts school to a state-funded HBCU. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, how are they gonna look at me coming from a liberal arts school? You know, are they gonna make assumptions about the rigor of the curriculum or my abilities? And I can honestly say that, like, I had no issues getting interviews, I had no issues getting acceptances. And in a lot of interviews, they actually asked me about my school, like it was a talking point. And so I'd say, like, don't be insecure about your institution at all.
Absolutely. You know, and I think she also, you reminded me, Angelique, just to say, if you've any community college credits or IB credits, we also don't see as a negative. So that's definitely not something you should be concerned about. Again, if anything, I took community college credits too, both my chemistry pre-med requisites were done at a community college. I know that they're still pretty rigorous. So
we have time for one more question.
One last question.
I think, Dr. Quezada, will you put your contact information in the chat so anybody can kind of get you, and Angelique and Kayla, if you don't mind, put your contact so anybody can kind of reach you directly if any of the students wanted to. And we'll just take this last question. And if they have any other questions, you can always email you or contact you. Sure.
So, and this is a really important one. So I'm glad that this got asked. So given our class size, which our class size usually is somewhere around 150 50. The incoming class will be closer to 140, but we'll probably move back up into the 150 after that. And we're just only making those adjustments because of the new curriculum and wanting to make sure that we have enough, plenty of room and space for our students in our clinical rotations. But given the class size, how does Maryland create a more intimate learning environment for students? Well, I will say that we do try to balance having not the whole curriculum taught to you just in the big sort of lecture kind of format, which both Angelique and Kyla will be finally sitting in the lecture hall in the fall. Of course, we did everything, well, any larger group kind of discussion, or even a lot of the small group discussions were done remotely this year. But my point being that we try to balance the, some of it will be large lecture hall discussion, and then some of it we do also include small group discussion every day. So it's balanced so that you also have, a group of maybe 15 of your classmates that you're having team-based discussions and discussing clinical cases together, so that you have a chance to also get to know some of your faculty preceptors and work with them a little bit more closely than you would in a lecture hall. So I think that that does help create a more intimate learning environment. Also, the practice of medicine course, which is a course where you learn about how to take a history, how to learn a physical exam. That's also even a small group, usually that you're maybe like 7 or 8 students in your POM group. I know you're both like trying to think, yeah, but it's usually somewhere in that range. So a smaller group where you work with a faculty preceptor and developing these clinical skills. So I'm so excited for both Angelique, Kyla, and all of our first years who are going to start, moving more into the in-person format in the fall. But I think hopefully even remotely we were able to create some environment. But yeah, I'll let them chime in if you want to. Besides what I mentioned, or if you want to reinforce anything I said for this question.
Yeah, I'd say that having the small groups every day, so we have lecture, which is 8 to 10, and that's on Zoom for us, just faculty member lecturing, but obviously you can ask questions by unmuting or through the chat. But then we have our small group sessions from 10 to 12. And with our small groups, it's about 4 to 5 of us. So that definitely allows us to like build relationships with each other and like get to talk things out that we've learned. I usually learn more in small group than I do in lecture, honestly, because it takes me a while to like synthesize it. And then once I talk to classmates, I'm like, oh, that's how, okay, that makes sense. And what's also nice about our virtual small group is that faculty members pop in if we have any questions, and then we can always like request a faculty member to come in. So, and it's pretty easy to have that happen. So that also helps us like talk to faculty, and I feel like it might be easier to do over Zoom. It kind of like breaks that barrier when we're just in the room. You can just feel like you can talk to them and not, I don't know how it would feel doing it in the small group session in person, because the few in-person sessions that we have had, it's just one faculty member in a room of like 25 of us. But yeah, it's definitely easy to feel like you get that intimate attention if you're looking for it. And then you can always reach out to faculty. They always answer emails, so.
Awesome. Actually, and one other thing I remember hearing from students is a lot of students develop study groups, even over Zoom, which I think was pretty cool, because I did that in person. We would go to the library and have my group of 3 or 4 other classmates. We'd, just like Kyla said, just talking through some things and concepts, and hearing how your classmate, picked up on something that you didn't, or you being able to explain something to someone else really kind of solidifies it in your mind. So, and you're developing those relationships and friendships as well while you're doing that. So it's pretty great. So I know that we've run 4 minutes over our allotted time, and I want to make sure Lasara has her full time. So I will end here, but thank you all for your great questions and your attention. I hope this was helpful. And thank you again to Kyla and Angelique for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you so much. I think that was so informative for all of the students. And for me, there's a mentor too. So as you said, sometimes when you're farther away, it's a little bit difficult to kind of remember because I did the paper MCAT. So it was a while ago. So thank you, Dr. Quezada. Thank you, Angelique. Thank you, Kayla. I really, really appreciate your time. I'll reach out to you for anything we're doing. I definitely would be interested in you, Angelique and Kayla, kind of talking to our pre-meds, mentoring a few, to kind of help them with the MCAT application and medical school and this whole journey. I tell everybody it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And thank you again so much, ladies. I really appreciate your time.
Our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So we're going to go to Lasara, who I'm trying to find. I saw her. Yes, right here. How are you doing? Welcome. I'll make you co-host if you have any thing to present to us. Let me see. So let me just read a little bit about Lasara's bio. She's a wife, author, seventh leader, and a medical student. She was born and raised in Georgia, and at a very young age, she knew she wanted to be a physician, but she never imagined that her path to medical school would take more than 9 years to be accomplished. Her perseverance and resilience through her journey has compelled her to encourage other pre-med students to never give up on their dream of becoming a physician. She shares her fears, failures, triumphs, and the lessons she has learned along the way on her website, lasarabelle.com, where her devotions give you the pep talk you need to keep moving forward. She was recognized by Voyage ATL magazine as one of their 2018 trailblazers and was a part of their shout out campaign. In her spare time, she enjoys cooking, finding new running and hiking trails, and watching a good movie with her husband. You can contact her through on Instagram at PrepMedTalk. So thank you so much, Lasara. Thank you for joining us. So I just wanted you to tell us a little about your journey through medical school, 9 years. 9 years. I know it's kind of difficult, but kind of summarize how difficult that must have been for you.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So like the bio said, I knew from a very young age that I wanted to be a doctor, but had some challenges and setbacks along the way. I took the traditional route. After graduating from high school, I attended the University of Georgia. I'm originally from Georgia, and did the pre-med track. So I knew, that I wanted to go that route. I went to a predominantly African-American high school in kind of an underserved community. So when I got to the University of Georgia, which is a predominantly white institution, and it's a very rigorous curriculum, it's a state school, I had a lot of challenges with the curriculum. And so it's kind of nostalgic sitting here when I was listening to some of the other first year students talk about, applying and how to craft your application to overcome some of those failures that you had in undergrad. And so I know those very well. Thankfully, I didn't fail any courses, but my science GPA wasn't that competitive. Overall, I graduated in 4 years with a 3.3 GPA, and my science GPA was about a 2.9, which if you're applying now or you've looked at some of the stats at schools, that's not that competitive. And so I was really concerned about my application and my chances of getting accepted. So talking to advisors, talking to mentors, and grateful that I had some really good advisors at UGA and mentors to kind of guide me through that process. They recommended that I do a post-bac program. So I did a post-bac program at Drexel University College of Medicine in Philly. And so that was a really good program for me. I was able to take some upper level science courses, kind of fine tune my study skills. That was kind of the major issue for me, was to figure out how best I needed to, what was the best route of studying for me, and how to kind of master some of those really tough science courses. As most of you probably know, if you're pre-med, you know, OChem is a beast. Chemistry is not the best depending on who you are. So those were some of the classes that gave me some trouble. And so in the post-bac that I decided to take, we were able to retake some of those prereq classes, as well as take some upper level science courses that were taught by the med school professors. So I had the opportunity to take anatomy, physiology, some of the classes that I would see in my first year of medical school, some neuroscience courses and things like that. And doing well in those courses really helped boost my GPA, 1, and 2, help boost my confidence. And then 3, it also looked really good for my stats when applying to med school. So it was a 2-year post-bac program. The first year, I struggled. I still was trying to figure out what worked best. But, you know, I was very determined to, you know, figure things out and do my best. And so I was in office hours with my professors, you know, going through content, going through material, trying to figure out, you know, well, what's the best way to attack this material? And then by second year, I pretty much had my study routine down pat. I found a really great study group, and we were able to bounce ideas off of each other, quiz each other, talk through things just like some of the other students explained before. And so that was really beneficial, which was something that I didn't do in undergrad. So long story short, I ended up graduating from the post-bac program, doing really well that second year, and my GPA shot up. I retook the MCAT, and my MCAT score, I think, only increased maybe a point or so. The first time I took it, I took some time off that summer to really take time to study and just focus on the MCAT. I didn't work. I didn't have any more classes. And so that time it went up 5 points. But I started at a very, very low MCAT. So while 5 points seems like that's a lot, considering where I started from, it still wasn't the best. And so I ended up applying anyway, and I ended up getting, I think, 1 interview, and I got waitlisted. And so I was really hopeful, but I didn't get off the wait list. And so it was kind of discouraging for me, because after the interview, the interviewer told me I did an amazing job and that he was going to recommend me for the entering class for that year, but I never got off that wait list. And so it was super discouraging. And I ended up working in research for 4 years before I actually got accepted to medical school. And so it's a very long journey, but that kind of sums it up. I worked in research. I did a lot of clinical research, which still gave me a lot of patient interaction. So I wanted to do something that kept me very close to medicine so that I wouldn't forget my why. And so interacting with patients on a daily basis really helped me, 1, realize, okay, this is where I want to be. I'm around doctors, I'm around medical students. It was just a constant reminder of where I was headed. And then 2, it allowed me not to get comfortable, because I saw everyone around me doing exactly what I knew I wanted to do. And so it further pushed me to make sure that I continued to take steps to move forward in the right direction. And so the last time I took the MCAT, I took the new MCAT, which you guys all have taken as well, I'm sure. And I really liked that exam a lot better than the previous MCAT, because it was more of a, how do I want to say it? It was more of a holistic type of test. The previous MCAT was very siloed and isolated. And so the newer MCAT, I think, kind of consolidates everything together, which is how medicine is, which is how medical school is. It's not siloed. You don't learn things in isolation. And so I really liked that the new exam tested your knowledge of kind of building upon things like that. And then I was a psych major, so the addition of the behavioral science portion really helped me as well. So I took the MCAT that last time. I did really well. Still not like super amazing stats, but it was competitive enough to where I ended up getting, I think, 3 interviews and getting accepted to medical school finally. And so I am finishing up my first year of medical school now, and it has been an amazing journey, and it was worth every setback, every failure. It was worth it.
That's such an amazing story. My question is, were you applying every year, or you kind of took a break in between applications?
So my first time applying was in undergrad. So, they tell you junior year, you want to start preparing your application and submit. And so that first time I applied, my MCAT score was just absolutely horrible. I don't know why I applied. It was basically a waste of money. And so I applied anyway, and of course, I didn't get any interviews. I retook the MCAT that next semester, that next year, my senior year, and then reapplied right before graduation, and still didn't get any interviews, still didn't get anything, because my MCAT score maybe increased only 1 point. And so after that, I did the post-bac. So I took that year off, did the post-bac, but after that first year of the post-bac, I reapplied. So now we're talking twice in 1 year and then one the next year. That time the MCAT score actually went back down to the absolutely horrible score. And then after that, I completed that second year of the post-bac. And like I said, I took that summer off to just really focus on the MCAT. And that's when it kind of shot up significantly more than it had any other time. And so I applied with that score. After that, I had a lot of family issues going on. My dad actually got really sick right before I took that MCAT, right before I retook it an additional time after not getting off that wait list with the better score. And so that experience, I think, really took a toll on my mental health and my mindset while taking the exam. Because, after losing a loved one, especially a parent, that's a hard thing to deal with. And my mind just probably wasn't in the right place. And I probably should have postponed the exam. But after studying for months and months, I wanted to get the exam over with. My fear was that I'm going to forget it all and all these things. But in hindsight, I definitely should have given myself some time to grieve and, heal. And so now we're talking maybe a couple of years later that there was a gap between applying. And then after that score came back, it was pretty much, it was the new test, but the score was pretty much synonymous to the score on the old exam. And so after that, I took some time just to get myself together, grieve my father, do all of that. And I got a tutor. I talked to some more mentors and some admission committee advisors, and, just really sought out what I needed to do at this point to increase the score on this new exam. And so I think it took me about 2 more years before I decided to reapply again.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I cannot imagine how much you had to persevere through that. And, Lighthouse, we care not only about medical school, but your life values and your relationship with God and Christ. So how did that help you persevere through this long 9-year journey? Like and I'm sorry to hear about you also lost your father during that time. How did that kind of anchor you to continue chasing, the dream?
Yeah, absolutely. If it wasn't for my faith and my belief in God, I definitely would have given up a long time ago. As a Christian, I look at other people and that go through similar circumstances with losing parents or losing loved ones. And I can't even imagine how they get through it without the strength of Christ. Because it was the scriptures that I recited over and over in my head that allowed me to keep pushing forward. I would have scriptures on my walls or write things down in my journal that would encourage me to keep moving forward, or even my community at my church, praying for me, interceding on my behalf to continue to push forward, and then holding me accountable. It's really funny. My church that I attend now, with my husband, before I even got accepted, they were calling me Dr. Belle. So, as a Christian, we talk about speaking things to an existence. And so those things were spoken over me even before we saw it manifested in the natural. And so my pastor always says, it's already done in the spirit. We're just waiting for it to manifest in the natural. And so, we speak to those things that be not as though they were. And so that's exactly what happened. And so if it wasn't for my relationship with God and just really being grounded and anchored in scripture and in community, I definitely probably would have given up a long time ago. And I will say too, the deeper you go in your walk with Christ, the more you're able to discern his plans for you. And when you're sure that these are the plans that he has for you, then you know that eventually it's going to happen. It's only a matter of time. And so that's what kept me going, because, we have doubts. We're humans. And there were a lot of times where I was like, well, maybe I missed God. Maybe I didn't hear him correctly when he said that I was supposed to be a doctor. Maybe I just made that up myself, because it hasn't happened. And sometimes that's the enemy, and sometimes that's just us, doubting ourselves and doubting what we know God has placed in our hearts. But I promise you, every single time I had one of those doubts, God would send somebody to encourage me, a random stranger, whether it would be somebody's parent that I was tutoring their kid and they found out that I was applying to medical school and was having a tough time getting in. And it just so happened that the parent's husband was a doctor and had a tough time getting in. And she was like, don't give up. I don't care how long it takes. Don't give up. I don't know this woman. She doesn't know me, but just little things like that would happen when I would get into those weak moments where I was thinking about just throwing in the towel, where God would send somebody, an angel here on earth, to encourage me and to say, like, hey, you're on the right path. You're not crazy. You heard God right. Keep going. So.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I know that everybody has dealt with failure or will deal with failure in this journey to be a physician, which I say is more of it's a service, it's not a job, it's a career, it's a calling. So like, what is your advice for any student grappling with failure, or, even has applied before and now has been rejected, or low MCAT score? Like, what is your advice for them?
Absolutely. My first thing I would say to you, if you failed a class in undergrad, if you've applied multiple times, don't get discouraged. Don't give up. When I tell you that now being on the other side of this, there's so many people in my first year class who may have come right out of undergrad, but now they're struggling in med school. There's so many people who come from all different walks of life, and failure is inevitable. All of the people who are great people, if you think of the person in your mind that you absolutely look up to, your role model, who you think, wow, that's #goals. That's who I want to be when I grow up. Then I guarantee you there's a point in their life where they failed tremendously one time or another, and they had to continue to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and keep pressing on and keep persevering to get to where they are today. And so a lot of times I think our world glamorizes like this microwave lifestyle where things happen overnight, and that's just not the reality. Like, greatness and success does not come overnight. It comes with hard work and perseverance. So if you fail, you're in good company. I don't know any doctor, anybody, honestly, even when talking to my mentors and talking to my professors who are doctors still practicing now, they will tell you, you know, I hated, you know, anatomy. I didn't do well in that course, but they're doctors now. So I would tell you, one, to keep pressing forward, keep persevering. If you know that this is what you want to do, don't give up. No matter what, do not give up, because if there's a will, there's a way. You just heard from the admissions director at University of Maryland that said, you know, we like to see students who've overcome setbacks and failures. And that's absolutely true. When I crafted my application, I was very transparent about my journey, about the setbacks, about the failures. But I also, like she said, talked about what I learned from those experiences, because the biggest thing that med schools want to see is that you're someone who is introspective, because med school is hard. And once you get here, you're here, but then you have to stay there. And so it's going to be 10 times harder in med school in the courses that you take. And so I know even myself, like I've managed to make it all the way to the end, but there's been some courses that have been very challenging. And so when I go to my professors and I'm asking for help, the number one thing they're asking me is, okay, what do you think you did wrong? How do you think you can improve? What do you think you need to do? And so having that introspective ability is super important, one for your application and one once you get here, because it is a journey. It's not a sprint. It is a marathon. And you want to make sure that you're always looking within yourself, figuring out, okay, what can I do better? How can I improve? And that would be the best advice. And make sure that you have a good support system. That's the other thing. Whether it's your church community, whether it's your family, your friends, have people around you that's going to hold you accountable when times get tough and you are thinking about going in a different direction. Because if God placed this in your heart, that means there's a need for you in the world. And so, you know, you don't want to back out of your anointing, back out of your purpose, because you don't know who you're hindering by not moving forward in what God has for you with your journey and your purpose. So.
I love that answer. So if anybody has a question, please, you can just say it or put it in the chat. I have your email, or you can also put your email in the chat for anybody that would want to contact you. But anybody has a question for Lasara before we let her go? She spent her whole evening with us and she probably has something to study for right now. Any questions? One, twice. Okay, so let me put, okay, you've put that for everyone, and I'll put the Lighthouse Scholar email right here. If you have any questions, need mentorship, need prayer, need advice, we're available. If you want to get involved with the organization, to be part, we have a student board also, if you want to be part of that, or if you want to be part of we'll send you the Zoom link for every other Saturday lessons where I kind of teach on topics I think are important to us as students and young professionals. I'm teaching on failure next month, which inevitably will happen to everybody going through this medical school journey. Thank you so much. Thank you, Neha Pakala. I see you. Thank you so much. I gained a lot as a mentor, and then I'm quite sure everybody gained. And thank you so much, Lasara. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your knowledge. Thank you, everyone. If there are no questions, we'll be ending the meeting, and take a note of the email. Thank you, guys. Thank you for joining.
If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out via Instagram or email. I'm always open to helping and answering questions, mentoring, all that good stuff. So
thank you. Thank you, guys. You hear from me all.